Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. High Commissioner, fellow panelists, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Brazil has reiterated its firm and traditional commitment to the promotion and protection of all human rights, including the human right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable development, and to advancing the environmental agenda, which is essential for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, it's worth recalling that within the framework of the 2030 Agenda, Goal 17 underscores the obligation of international cooperation, particularly with regard to the commitments of developed countries to provide financial resources, technology transfer, and capacity building support to developing countries. Poverty diminishes the resilience of poor populations to extreme climatic events and further hinders their effective participation in decisions related to adaptation measures. In Brazil, where poverty is marked by a clear racial bias, the debate on environmental racism and climate justice gains momentum. Brazil recognizes and values the vital role of environmental defenders, acknowledging them as human rights defenders. Their work is essential for the protection of natural resources and the preservation of the way of life of traditional and indigenous peoples, representing an important contribution to sustainable development. In Brazil, the main initiative dedicated to protecting these individuals is the National Program for the Protection of Human Rights Defenders, Communicators, and Environmentalists. Recently, a working group composed of government and civil society representatives concluded its work with the objective of rethinking existing protection strategies, strengthening the overall protection framework, and propose a national policy for the protection of human rights defenders to our Congress. It is worth highlighting that indigenous people make up the majority of individuals under protection, given their prominent role as environmental defenders. To strengthen the normative framework for the protection of human rights defenders, the Brazilian government is currently examining the ratification of the so-called Escazú Agreement, which is a regional agreement on access to information, public participation, and access to justice in environmental matters in Latin America and the Caribbean. In the case of indigenous peoples, Brazil recognized their fundamental role in environmental conservation and the maintenance of social biodiversity, especially in all of the biomes, but Amazon, specifically Amazon's Cerrado and the Atlantic forest. The Brazilian government aims to guarantee and promote the protection, recovery, conservation, and sustainable use of natural resources in indigenous lands and territories. This includes the transfer of technologies and knowledge, as well as financing in the context of a just transition. These plans and the policy itself seek to strengthen indigenous autonomy and ensure that protection and sustainable development actions in their territories are aligned with their cultures and ways of life. Brazil considers of great importance enabling just transitions from a carbon-intensive economic model to a low-carbon model that leaves no one behind. We understand that just transition processes are directly related to promoting sustainable development and eradicating poverty, as well as to strengthening climate adaptation and resilience. We advocate that just transitions must respect and take into account international human rights obligations, the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, the right to health, and the rights of vulnerable groups such as women, youth, children, people of African descent, indigenous peoples, local communities, migrants, people with disabilities, peasants, LGBTQIA+ persons, and other vulnerable groups. We believe that just transitions are largely dependent on an adequate level of financing, technology transfer, and capacity building to be provided by developed countries to developing countries, in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. A just transition of the workforce must create decent work and quality jobs, include both the formal and informal sectors. It must also address the situation of the unemployed, unpaid workers, and vulnerable groups, and must aim at reducing gender inequalities in the labor market. It shall be based on social dialogue, social protection, and the broad recognition of labor rights. We reaffirmed the importance of a just energy transition, which takes into account the principles adopted by the G20 in 2024, in particular the fight against poverty, energy planning in accordance with national development priorities, and the balanced distribution of energy costs in order to reduce impacts on the poorest and most vulnerable segments of society. By hosting COP30 in Belém next November, Brazil aims to foster inclusive dialogue with indigenous peoples, traditional communities, people of African descent, youth, and the civil society, ensuring that climate solutions are equitable, participatory, and grounded in environmental justice and human rights. I thank you.